In April 1841, Silas Ruddle issued a declaration that stunned even the most callous plantation owners across South Carolina. He was transferring his daughter Catherine, a 28-year-old woman who weighed more than 260 pounds, into the absolute authority of an enslaved man called Ezekiel Cross. Not merely as caretaker or companion, but as her owner in every sense that truly counted, save for the legal paper. Colleton County's white society reeled in outrage, yet none of them grasped what Ruddle was actually attempting, nor what Ezekiel Cross would inflict upon Catherine in the months ahead. By November, Catherine's body had altered in ways no one could fathom. 13 men lay dead, and Cypress Grove Plantation had become only ashes. What truly transpired between that enslaved man and the daughter of his owner? What did he do to her that left every witness paralyzed with dread? Before I reveal the harrowing truth, subscribe, ring the bell, and drop your state in the comments below. Now, let me carry you back to where it all started. Spring in Colleton County arrived heavy with heat and damp that turned the air thick as wet wool. The Combahee River slid lazily through the lowcountry, its black water mirroring the Spanish moss that drooped from live oaks like mourning veils. Rice fields stretched endless in every direction, their flooded acres tended by hundreds of enslaved souls waiting knee-deep from first light until night swallowed the sky. This was fortune forged from torment. Prosperity wrung from human anguish. All of it defended by men who had convinced themselves that cruelty was merely the natural way of things. Cypress Grove Plantation covered 800 acres of middling soil. Its master, Silas Ruddle, hovered just outside the county's true aristocracy, yet craved entry with a hunger that devoured him. He owned 58 enslaved people, enough to be called wealthy by ordinary measure, yet barely middle rank among local lords. The real powers held thousands of acres and hundreds of lives. They summered in Charleston, sent sons north to universities, and wielded names that could open doors or shatter lives with a whisper. Silas had wed Elizabeth Yancey in 1812, a marriage that delivered decent land and an old respected surname. Elizabeth had been a practical woman, more concerned with ledgers than ladders of status. She died in 1813, bringing their only child, Catherine, into the world. For 28 years Silas raised the girl alone while pouring every ounce of ambition into cracking the county's inner circle. Tall and gaunt, the kind of thin that comes from forgetting meals amid obsession, his hair had silvered early, lending him a stern, icy look that suited his temperament. In dealings he was shrewd yet kept his word, just honorable enough. His daughter Catherine grew up lonely, tutored in isolation, never truly fitting anywhere. By 1841 she was 28 and nearing 260 pounds, her body bloated from years of medicines forced on her by doctors who labeled her hysterical and nervously disordered. She endured violent episodes, screaming, hurling objects. The year before she had slashed her father's hand with a letter opener, leaving a pale scar. The white families of Colleton County murmured with practiced pity, poor Silas Ruddle, saddled with a lunatic daughter, what a tragedy, when once she had been such a lovely child. None of them knew the truth. None suspected that Catherine's madness was no illness at all, but the only sane reaction to sharing a roof with monsters. The letter came on April 7 by private courier. Silas opened it in his study expecting routine business. Instead he found 3 sheets of costly paper sealed in red wax with a familiar mark, a scythe crossed by stalks of wheat, the sigil of the Brethren of the Harvest. 13 men who met in secret, convinced their blood rights fed the land and preserved their power. They blended ancient European rites with fragments stolen from the spiritual knowledge of the enslaved. They believed the strong were obliged, literally, to consume the weak. Silas had been inducted in 1822 and had attended perhaps 40 gatherings, taking part in ceremonies that ranged from grotesque to unspeakable. The letter stated he was $12,000 in debt, gambling, bad ventures, an amount that would force him to sell nearly everything. Yet an alternative was offered, a demonstration of commitment for members in distress. Silas must place his daughter Catherine under the total authority of one of his enslaved men, not as temporary punishment, but as a genuine, year-long transfer of dominion over her person, her days, her treatment. He would announce it publicly at a gathering of the county's leading families, claiming it an extreme medical remedy for her condition. The humiliation would be complete. In a world that placed white womanhood on a pedestal, he would proclaim his own daughter worth less than his property. In exchange, the debt vanished and the Brethren would bankroll his return to status. Silas sat in his study until the candles guttered. Bankruptcy would ruin him utterly, and the Brethren's reach touched every court and office in the region. Or he could trade his daughter's dignity for his own survival, the choice his world had trained him to make without hesitation, property above people, power above conscience. By candlelight he penned acceptance and dispatched it before dawn. 3 days later arrived a second letter bearing a name and scant history: Ezekiel Cross, age 33, lately bought through an agent from a Virginia estate. Listed skills: carpentry, herbal medicine. Temperament: quiet, obedient. What it omitted was that Ezekiel had been chosen deliberately, that his arrival at Cypress Grove was orchestrated, that he carried a cold, patient hunger for justice sharp enough to cut the world in half. Ezekiel reached the plantation on April 13 in a wagon driven by the trader Henderson. The wagon halted directly before the main house, unusual, as slave sales normally occurred by the barns. Silas stepped onto the porch, squinting into morning glare. In the wagon bed sat Ezekiel. The first thing Silas noted were the eyes. Most enslaved people kept their gaze lowered for survival, but Ezekiel met his stare calmly, measuring. Tall, 6'2", with broad shoulders and the lean strength of lifelong labor, his skin bore no whip scars, his clothing plain but clean. His hands were large, calloused, yet his fingers moved with a craftsman's precision. Henderson handed over papers. Ezekiel Cross, as requested. Former owner said he's quiet but capable. Your associates asked me to mention, he was chosen with care. Silas barely scanned the documents and spoke directly to Ezekiel. You know why you're here? Yes, sir, came the reply, deep, steady, lightly touched by a Virginia cadence. My daughter is unwell. You'll tend her. Doctors have failed. You claim knowledge of roots and herbs. My grandmother was a healer, sir. She taught me before I was sold away. The sale concluded swiftly. Ezekiel was given a small cabin near the main house, apart from the other quarters, basic supplies, and told his duties began tomorrow, sole responsibility for Catherine, with severe consequences for failure. He nodded, yes, sir, when required, then was left alone. Only then did the mask slip, jaw loosening, shoulders easing. He sat on the narrow bed and drew from inside his shirt a tiny cloth bundle. Unwrapped, it revealed a worn scrap of paper holding 3 names in childish scrawl: Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, his wife, his son, his daughter, sold from him 3 years earlier to an Alabama plantation infamous for working people into the ground. All 3 dead within 18 months, Sarah from fever left untreated, Benjamin from a wound turned septic, little Ruth, 6 years old, simply stopping eating because she could not comprehend why her world had shattered. And the man who had torn them apart for sport, to prove his ruthlessness to the brethren, had been Silas Ruddled. Ezekiel had spent 2 years working his way south, plantation to plantation, gathering whispers, learning of the brethren, their rights, their arrogance. When the chance came to be sold specifically to Ruddled, he seized it. Access to the house, the secrets, the man himself. Sometimes justice arrived not through law but through patience, planning, and willingness to become whatever monster the moment demanded. He folded the paper, tucked it away, lay back, and began to plot. His first day began April 14th. A house slave named Judith, middle-aged, gray threading her hair, led him reluctantly to Catherine's second-floor room. She knocked. Miss Catherine, your father sent someone to help with treatments. A crash answered, something heavy striking the wall. Catherine's voice, thick but venomous, I want no more treatments. Send him away. Judith glanced at Ezekiel with pity. Bad days. This is one. Ezekiel opened the door and stepped inside, closing it behind him. The room was vast but dim, curtains drawn tight, air stale with unwashed linens and the sickly sweet rot of mercury. Books lay scattered, a picture frame shattered, clothing strewn. Catherine sat beside a cold hearth wrapped in a stained robe, dark hair matted, face swollen, eyes unfocused, hands trembling without cease. She looked at him, confusion, fear, fury. Who are you? I said no more doctors. I am no doctor, miss. Name's Ezekiel. Your father asked me to help. Help, she laughed, bitter. That's what they all call it, help, treatment, cure. They mean poison. Chains. Silence. She rose swaying. I know what this is. Punishment again for remembering. Ezekiel remained still, unthreatening. What are you meant to forget? The question startled her, anger flickered into something raw. You don't know. I know nothing, miss. Only that your father says you're unwell. She studied him as if truly seeing him for the first time. You're not from here. Virginia, miss, originally. Do you know what happens in this house? What they do in the cellar? His pulse spiked, but his face stayed calm. I don't know what you mean. Liar, she said wearily, no heat in it. Everyone lies. It's easier. She sank back into the chair. Leave me. Tell my father his latest torment failed. Instead, Ezekiel crossed to the window and flung the curtains wide. Sunlight poured in. Catherine flinched, shielding her eyes. When did you last step outside, miss? I can't walk far. Too weak. When did you last eat without laudanum? The medicine is necessary. Doctors say. What if the doctors are wrong? Her hands lowered. She stared at him, hope and terror warring. What did you say? He turned from the window. This was the first move. I said, what if everything you've been told about your illness is meant not to heal you but to keep you docile? What if your father has been poisoning you for years so you never grow strong enough to speak of what you saw? Silence stretched 30 seconds while her mind raced. When she spoke again, her voice was clearer. He told you. Your father told me nothing. But I have eyes. I know mercury poisoning when I see it, long-term laudanum. Healthy women do not waste away like this unless someone works hard to make it so. Why would you say this? Suspicion crept back. This is a test. I'm telling you I can make you truly well, clear-headed, strong enough to leave this room under your own power. But it won't be gentle. Your body is dependent. Stopping will hurt. You'll worsen before you improve, and your father will fight it. Then why risk it? Ezekiel met her gaze. Because I have my own reasons for wanting Silas Ruddle to suffer. And the surest way is to return him a daughter sane enough to remember everything, and strong enough to tell. Truth laid bare was dangerous, but Catherine was damaged, not foolish. She would smell manipulation, shared purpose she might trust. You want revenge on my father? Yes, miss. What did he do to you? He sold my family, my wife, my children, to death for no reason but to prove his cruelty to men who measure worth in pain. She absorbed it, then nodded once. The brethren. He sold them for the brethren. Not a question. The brethren, miss. She gave a laugh edged with mania. You'll learn. Everyone does. She leaned forward. If I agree, if I let you help, what then? You heal. And when you're healed, we decide what comes next. I have my vengeance to plan. You have yours. Perhaps they run the same path. She studied him a long moment. I want them all dead. My father, Judge Pelham, Reverend Crenshaw, every man who stood in that cellar. I want them to suffer first, to beg, then I want them dead. The venom shocked not for its heat but for its source, someone the world had dismissed as harmless lunatic. This was no madness, this was fury honed for 16 years. Ezekiel inclined his head. Then we understand each other, Miss Catherine. If we're conspirators, call me Catherine. I cannot, miss. Not warriors might hear. We must be careful. Then know this, Ezekiel. Her eyes glittered. I have killed before. 3 house slaves who might have carried tales. The laudanum clouds memory, but I know I did it. They vanished. Their families told they ran north. Her smile was terrible. So if you plan to use me and discard me, understand I am no mere victim. I'm something worse. Cold slid down his spine. He had sought an ally, not a partner whose capacity for violence might eclipse his own. Yet he held steady. I believe you, miss. I will not betray you. Good. She stood straighter. Then let us begin. But I have one condition. When it's over, when we've had our revenge, I want to die. I will not live carrying what I've seen and done. You'll help me with that too. He had not expected the clause, but the pact was sealed. Agreed. She extended her hand. After a beat he took it, her grip surprisingly strong. A bargain struck in a poisoned room. Over the following week Ezekiel began the slow, brutal work of weaning her from laudanum, replacing doses with valerian for sleep, chamomile for the gut, milk thistle for the liver, drowning in toxins. Withdrawal was hell. 3 days of fever, shaking, retching. He stayed at her side, holding the basin, wiping her brow, speaking low so she knew she was not alone. When the worst passed, she was frail but lucid, tremor lessened, speech clear, able to read again. Then the real labor started, short walks down the hall and back, each day a little farther. He changed her diet, lean meat, greens, portions strictly measured despite her protests, years of comfort eating hard to unlearn. While her body mended, they talked. Catherine told him of the cellar, of what she had witnessed at 12, details that turned his stomach, yet he listened without flinching. She spoke of the years of gaslighting after, her father convincing the world, and nearly her, that she had imagined everything. She spoke of the hidden journal, pages of coded dates, late-night visitors, impossible sounds from below. Ezekiel told her of Sarah who sang while hoeing, who taught their children letters in secret, of Benjamin, 8 years old, already outsmarting overseers at figures, of Ruth who gathered wildflowers to brighten their cabin. He told how Silas had arrived in Virginia with a buyer's warrant, inspected them like cattle, agreed to take all 3 for a fair price, then at the final moment declared he needed only the woman and children, splitting the family for no reason but the pleasure of demonstrating power. How he had smiled doing it. Catherine listened with newly clear eyes. "I'm sorry. Sorry is only a word, but I am sorry you suffered because of what my father is. You are not your father, miss. No. But I am responsible for what I do next. And I promise you, he will pay for what he stole from you. They all will." The formal announcement was set for April 29. 41 guests filled the Cypress Grove dining room for what invitations called an important family matter. The county's elite arrived in gleaming carriages, Judge Pelham and Eleanor, Reverend Crenshaw with his daughter, Marcus Fanning, banker Benjamin Lyle. The table groaned: oysters, roast duck, rice 3 ways, sweet potatoes, fresh bread, a towering cake. Catherine sat at her father's right, eating sparingly, speaking only when addressed. Ezekiel served with the other house slaves, silent, invisible, yet absorbing every word, every glance. After dessert, Silas rose and tapped his glass. "My friends, thank you for coming. As you know, Catherine has suffered poor health for years. Every physician, from Charleston, even Philadelphia, failed. Until recently." He gestured to Ezekiel. 2 weeks ago I engaged Ezekiel, knowledgeable in herbal medicine. As you see, Catherine is vastly improved, calm, clear, more herself than in a decade. Polite murmurs. Catherine kept her face neutral, though Ezekiel saw her knuckles white on the napkin beneath the table. "This improvement," Silas continued, "has forced a hard choice. Catherine requires care too intensive for ordinary household management. After prayerful consideration, I have decided Ezekiel will assume full responsibility for my daughter's welfare, complete authority over treatment, schedule, and living arrangements, effective at once." The murmurs turned sharp. Confusion, then shock. Mrs. Pelham's hand flew to her throat. Marcus Fanning spoke first. "Silas, surely you don't mean placing your daughter permanently under a slave?" "I place her with the one person who succeeded where white physicians failed. My daughter's health matters more than convention." Reverend Crenshaw tried gently. "There are other options, companions, nurses." Silas's voice hardened. "My decision is made. Catherine consents, do you not, daughter?" Every eye turned to her. This was the moment she could shatter everything. Instead she offered a small, perfect smile. "I trust my father's judgment. Ezekiel has been kind, his treatments effective. I am content." Flawless performance. Yet Ezekiel saw the truth, knuckles bone white, eyes promising murder. She played the dutiful daughter while inside she screamed. The evening ended awkwardly. Some guests departed early, others lingered to press Silas privately. Ezekiel caught fragments. "Are you certain this is wise? What will people say?" And from Judge Pelham low near the study, "The brethren will not like this becoming public." Silas's reply was too soft to catch, but Pelham nodded and clapped his shoulder. By midnight the house emptied. Catherine retired upstairs, Silas to his study, Ezekiel to clean up. Later he tapped softly at her door. "Come in." She sat by the window still in her dinner gown, staring into darkness. "It is done then?" Property of property. How perfectly absurd. How are you, miss? I want to burn this house with every soul inside. But patience, yes. That's what you keep telling me. Yes, miss. I agreed because I want them complacent. Let them think father merely eccentric. Let them forget me while we work. She turned. Did you see their faces? Disgust. Pity. They think me pathetic. They have no idea. And what exactly are we planning, miss? She crossed to her dresser, drew out a wooden box, opened it to reveal pages of her careful handwriting. I've recorded everything I remember, dates, names, ritual descriptions coded to look meaningless. Decoded, it damns 20 men. Will anyone believe us, a madwoman lately recovered and an enslaved man? No. Which is why we need proof they cannot dismiss. She produced one sheet. They keep a ledger of every rite, every sacrifice, every participant. Mutual guilt binds them. Father bragged about it once before realizing I'd remember. It's in the cellar, hidden room beyond the altar chamber. Excitement and dread mingled in Ezekiel's chest. We'd need the house empty. Father travels to Charleston monthly. Next trip May 14th, gone 3 days. That gives us 2 weeks. They spent an hour whispering plans. Catherine sketched the cellar from memory. Ezekiel asked about keys, guards, slave schedules. When he left it was nearly 2 in the morning, mind blazing. He was now bound in conspiracy with a woman brilliant, broken, and terrifying. The next 2 weeks passed in deceptive quiet. Catherine's weight fell, her strength rose, her mind stayed razor-sharp. She translated coded journal sections that chilled Ezekiel's blood. The brethren were not unique to Colleton County but part of a chain: Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Richmond, same structure, different names. Wealthy men who believed power flowed from ancient rites of dominance and blood. European mystery cults twisted with knowledge stolen from the enslaved, turned into justification for horrors. Sacrifices aren't always human, she explained one afternoon. Sometimes animals. Sometimes people no one will miss, runaways, friendless slaves, poor whites. Once father mentioned a child. I never learned if he meant it literally. Where do the bodies go? Swamps. Gators finish the work. And the ledger records everything, 40 years of names, dates, atrocities. They keep it so no one can betray the rest without damning himself. May 14th came. Silas departed at dawn for Charleston with his manservant, due back the 16th. They waited until full dark. By 10 the main house slept. They met in Catherine's room. She wore simple dark clothing, hair tightly bound, ready for war. You're certain, miss? Never more certain. Let's go. The cellar door hid behind kitchen paneling. Pressed correctly it swung inward onto narrow stairs descending into damp and rot. The stench hit instantly, wet earth, old smoke, decaying sweetness. You grow used to it, Catherine whispered. I wish I could say the smell fades. Ezekiel carried a shuttered lantern. 20 creaking steps down opened into a 30-foot chamber, low-ceilinged, floor-packed dirt, walls weeping moisture. At the center stood the altar, now merely a heavy table, yet dark stains and carved grooves told its story. Candle holders, sealed clay jars, black robes with crimson trim lined the walls. Catherine moved with certainty, led him to the far side, pressed a stone. A section swung inward revealing a smaller chamber. There on a wooden stand rested the ledger, 2 feet tall, 18 inches wide, bound in dark leather with iron clasps. Smaller journals flanked it, shelves held jars Ezekiel refused to study. They worked 3 hours, Catherine copying key rituals that named current members, Ezekiel listing victims and dates. The content was a descent into hell, systematic murder, cannibalism performed as sacrament to transfer power. At least 37 dead, likely more, mostly enslaved, some poor whites, indigenous travelers. And in October 1838, 3 terse lines about his own family. They were absorbed, deaf to footsteps on the stairs. Light flared, brighter than their single lamp. Silas Ruddle stood in the hidden doorway flanked by armed men. I must confess, Silas said calmly, I am impressed. I did not expect you to locate the inner chamber. Catherine stepped between her father and Ezekiel. You were meant to be in Charleston. I was. But I never trusted your sudden recovery. I returned this afternoon and watched. He advanced. The exit was blocked. Did you truly believe I would not anticipate rebellion? You poisoned me for 16 years, Catherine said, voice steady. And expected gratitude. I expected understanding. You saw what you should not have as a child. I could not let you destroy everything. I was 12 and watched you murder a woman and eat her flesh. That was not childish terror, Father. That was sanity confronting evil. Silas's gaze shifted to Ezekiel. And you, using my daughter to reach me. 7 men total, odds impossible. Silas read Ezekiel's calculation. Do nothing foolish. Bring them upstairs. They were locked in the study, windowless save a high transom. Catherine immediately pressed close. You're unhurt. Yes, miss, but the situation is grave. Not as grave as you think. From inside her dress she produced the copied pages. He was too confident to search me. Upstairs voices gathered, the brethren were summoning. Marcus Fanning opened the door hours later. They're ready. Back in the cellar the chamber had transformed, 13 robed figures, candles blazing, altar draped crimson. Ezekiel and Catherine were placed in the circle's center facing Silas at the head. Brothers of the harvest, Silas intoned, we face crisis. My daughter and her servant found our inner sanctum and were copying the ledger when I intervened. Judge Pelham, then silenced them permanently. My daughter is blood, Silas countered. And the men presents opportunity. What opportunity? Reverend Crenshaw asked. To prove our doctrine, any soul can be drawn in if the price is right. He turned to Ezekiel. You want revenge for your family. I offer you a greater one. Join us, not as equal, never that, but as associate. Attend rites, participate. In exchange I deliver Edward Gaines, the Alabama planter who worked your wife and children to death. Resources, money, information, everything to make him suffer as you have suffered. The proposition hung obscene. Join the monsters to destroy another monster. Refuse and both he and Catherine died tonight, bodies fed to the swamp, evidence burned. Catherine shook her head almost imperceptibly. Do not become them. But Ezekiel saw a third path, accept, infiltrate, buy time. What happens to her? She resumes medication, forgets again. No, Catherine cut in. I will not be silenced again. Kill me if you must, but I will not pretend. Silas's face hardened. Then your choice is made. Wait, Ezekiel said quickly. I accept, on condition Catherine goes free. Truly free. North. Money. New name. Never return. Some brethren grumbled, but Judge Pelham saw advantage. A woman lately mad would be dismissed, an enemy-turned accomplice proved their power absolute. Silas agreed. Catherine was to leave at dawn for Philadelphia under brethren escort. Ezekiel would remain for initiation in 3 weeks. Catherine stared betrayal, but Ezekiel caught her eye. Trust me. She understood, feigned surrender, not defeat. She departed at first light in a closed carriage. Ezekiel watched it vanish down the drive. They had not been allowed farewell, but the previous night as guards led her away she had glanced back once, eyes fierce with comprehension. The next 3 weeks were the longest of his life. Constant surveillance, menial labor, no leaving the grounds, yet also access to the main house, study, cellar. They tested him, he played broken man, obedient, asking nothing. Nights he mapped routines, noted trustworthy slaves, searched for cracks in their armor. And he wrestled with what initiation would demand, complicity in some fresh horror to bind him forever. On June 2nd, past midnight, Silas came alone to his cabin. Tomorrow you become one of us, enough of one. The brethren has never lost a member to betrayal because every man is equally damned. Join, and doors open you cannot imagine. In return you help maintain the order of strong over weak. You murdered my family to prove you belonged in that order. I did, and would again. Sentiment is weakness. But you can still give their deaths meaning, work from within to soften treatment of slaves, too. Ezekiel cut him off with a look. The offer was poison dressed as mercy. Silas leaned close. Tomorrow you will be asked to do something difficult. Do it without hesitation, or both you and Catherine die. Yes, I know she never reached Philadelphia. My men watch. One failure and she is found. He left Ezekiel in darkness with the weight of impossible choice. June 3rd, midnight. 2 brethren stripped Ezekiel to the waist, bound his hands, marched him below. 13 robed figures waited. At the altar lay a terrified enslaved girl, perhaps 18, gagged and struggling. Your test, Silas said. Make the first cut. Prove revenge against Gaines matters more than conscience. Chanting began. Silas extended a long, leather-wrapped knife. Ezekiel took it. The girl's eyes pleaded. He saw Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. He raised the blade, and lunged not at her but at the nearest robed men, burying steel in throat. Blood sprayed. He tore the robe free, flung it across candles, plunging half the chamber into darkness. Chaos exploded. He fought like vengeance itself, years of grief distilled into motion. Men fell, bones cracked, the brethren, soft from commanding violence rather than performing it, were no match. He freed the girl, run. Then turned to face the 7 still standing. Silas, calm amid carnage, you've killed yourself and Catherine both. Maybe. But I'll take as many of you as possible. What neither knew was that Catherine had never left for Philadelphia. For 3 weeks she had hidden among the quarters, rallying enslaved people who had suffered under her father and the brethren, 23 souls with nothing left to lose. When the bound girl burst screaming from the kitchen, Catherine led the tide. They poured into the cellar wielding axes, scythes, hammers. There was no mercy. Judge Pelham died before drawing his pistol. Reverend Crenshaw begged and received none. Silas, last, seized Catherine with knife to throat. Stop or she dies. Do it, Catherine said coldly. You've already lost. She drove an elbow into his ribs, spun free. Ezekiel was there. They faced each other, master and enslaved, at the end of everything. You took my family, Ezekiel said quietly. For no reason but that you could. Please, Silas whimpered. Did my wife say please? My son. No mercy came. When it ended, Catherine stood amid the bodies, trembling with release. Now we burn it all, she said. The ledger, the robes, every trace. Justice here was the only kind they would ever receive. Evidence taken to authorities would only bring hunt and death. They arranged the scene like accident, doused oil, set fire. Flames devoured cellar, then house. By dawn Cypress Grove was ash. As the sun rose over ruins, Catherine asked, "What now?" "Go north," Ezekiel answered, touching the paper with his family's names. "Help others escape. Make sure no more families are torn apart." "I'll go north too," she said. "With money I've stolen from father for years. I'll write everything, coded, hidden, until the day it can surface safely." They parted, her toward Charleston and eventual Philadelphia, him west toward free communities. They never met again. The official story: tragic fire during a business gathering, Silas Ruddle and 12 prominent guests perished in the cellar, overcome by smoke. Catherine reportedly died trapped in her room. No one searched closely. The enslaved scattered with the estate's sale, carrying silence to their graves. Whispers lingered in quarters long after, tales of the night the masters burned, of the woman and the men who brought justice. The stories grew into legend, but the heart stayed true. Cruelty has consequence, power is never absolute, sometimes the powerless seize the only power that matters: witness, memory, refusal to forget. What do you think of this story? Do you believe the whole truth was ever told? Do you think that hidden journal still waits somewhere? Drop your thoughts below. If you love this dark slice of history and want more tales that walk the line between fact and nightmare, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, ring the bell, and share this with someone who craves mystery soaked in real horror. Some stories refuse to stay buried. Some voices demand to be heard. See you in the next one.